Good morning. Buenos dias, Taigwe. We want to start with inviting you to introduce yourselves on the chat if you are willing and able. We know that folks might be joining us across mediums, and so on phones, on tablets, on computers, and even on the phone. I've seen a couple people who have called in today. In the meantime, we'll do the same. And so, self-intros, name, if you have preferred pronouns you'd like to share, your preferred pronouns, the agency that you work for, and your title and role at that agency. And throughout it, we'll also make sure that you are on mute, so that we don't have a whole lot of interference. For those who don't know me, although I believe most people on the call will likely know me, I am the face behind the name who sends these emails out and invites you to numerous rural calls. My name is Eva Fiallos Diaz. My preferred pronouns are they and she, and I am with the Florida Council Against Sexual Violence. I serve as the Rural Project Manager, and that's what this call is all about. And with me, I have Dina and Joan, and I'm going to give them a chance to jump in and introduce themselves as well.
Hi there. My name's Joan, and I am a therapist for Spark. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, licensed here in Florida, and I'm an LPCCS in Ohio as well, LICDC. I've done a lot of different things, but I'm just so passionate about helping all of our advocates and all of our clients here. I've been with Spark for about 4 years now as a therapist, and I'm just so thrilled to be here and humbled that you guys are giving us some time to explain our training that we went to, and I'm hoping that you'll get some good information today.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Eglandina Diaz Quintana. I work for Abuse Counseling Treatment Inc. down here in the Fort Myers, Hendry Glades area. My title is Director for the Sexual Assault Department within the outreach aspect. I am also a therapist. My background is in social work, so I am a registered clinical social work intern, and I'm grateful to be here. I'm looking forward to share this knowledge and resources with you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Joan and Dina. And I neglected to say that I am also a licensed clinical social worker, got my start at a dual center here in Florida in Leon County. So I do have a few housekeeping items for you before we get started. I want to make sure that you know that, yes, you can interact with us in the chat throughout the presentation. And so there will be different parts of the presentation where one of us will be engaged speaking. And so during that time, the other two of us will probably be keeping an eye on the chat, making sure that if you have questions, we can interrupt and get those answered, or if we can answer them ourselves, we will. And we will also share how you can get a hold of us, as well as the notes from today. And so you will have that, along with a couple of resources that we've pulled together that will help you kind of continue with this. If you are a licensed therapist and you're here today, please know that you can get CEUs if you're licensed in the state of Florida. So those are for the state of Florida. And hopefully you gave us your licensure number when you registered for this call. If not, just reach out to me at the end and I'll make sure you get those. I do want to talk a little bit about why we built this into our current project. And so this is our rural project from the year 2021. It ends in 2024. So we're on a 3-year grant cycle through the Office of Violence Against Women. So thank you, OVW. And this is my third rural project with FCASV. And as we know, resources are a huge barrier for sexual assault programs throughout the entire state. this is definitely even more so for rural communities, especially when there might be mental health services available, but those may not be trauma focused or culturally responsive. And so with this project, what we really wanted to focus on and to think strategically about was how we could incorporate treatment modalities that would help advocates, survivors, and communities, even if they came in for just one single session. And so we were looking for something that was a holistic modality that wasn't talk therapy. So it wasn't talk therapy based, because we know a lot of our communities don't like to talk about what's happened to them. We know that a lot of survivors may not have memories or very clear memories of what happened to them. And so some way to meet trauma at the somatic level, so at the body level, while flexibly lending itself to different cultural contexts. And so for today's call, we will cover a couple different things. We want to tell you a little bit about what EMDR is, if you're not familiar with it. Some of you may be already. Some basics of how it ties in with the neurobiology of trauma, who it works for, and then we'll end with some practices that you can either use for your own well-being and nervous system regulation as a whole, and or with survivors. You know, I'm really a firm believer that in order to teach, we have to be willing to learn these techniques for ourselves and practice them and really understand how they work and that they work. Because if we don't have buy-in, then it's going to be very difficult for us to get buy-in from a lot of our different survivors. And so with that, I'm going to invite Joan to kick us off with a little bit about EMDR therapy, what it is.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, it was my pleasure to be able to go through the training and to learn about EMDR therapy. I've known a little bit about it for a while, but I'm going to share some information with you today. Some of this I'm just going to be reading from some of our training material because I think it's very inclusive and it encompasses a lot of information. So I'll start out with, the basics. EMDR, what does that stand for? So that stands for eye movement desensitization. I knew I was going to make that mistake, and reprocessing. So I'll now read you the World Health Organization definition because it really does give a good picture of what EMDR really means. EMDR therapy is based on the idea that negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are the result of unprocessed memories. The treatment involves standardized procedures that include focusing simultaneously on spontaneous associations of traumatic images, thoughts, emotions, and body sensations. So it encompasses a lot of our feelings, senses. And bilateral stimulation that is most commonly in the form of repeated eye movements, but it doesn't have to be. Like CBT with trauma focus, EMDR aims to reduce subjective distress and strengthens adaptive beliefs related to traumatic events. And unlike CBT with trauma focus, EMDR does not involve detailed descriptions of the event, direct channeling of beliefs, extended exposure, or homework. So it's very unique in the way that it helps somebody process their information that they have stored. A little bit of history about EMDR. And if you have any questions, put it in the chat. We'll get to you. Dr. Francine Shapiro, in the 1980s, around 1987, she's a psychologist, cancer survivor. She was taking a walk in the park. This is like the historical event of how it came about. So she was taking a walk in the park and noticed that as she was thinking about some negative beliefs and cognitions that she was having, she noticed her eyes were moving back and forth. And then a little while later, she noticed that she wasn't having that same experience of trauma that she had had before. So she went to her colleagues and said, hey, I think I'm onto something. And so she started really kind of doing some research on how this movement and the bilateral stimulation between your eyes going back and forth while you're thinking of distressing thoughts converts those distressing thoughts into more adaptive ways to think about your trauma. So she did a lot of research on it. She published in 1989 the first the first research, and you know, she noticed that as she went on, that it doesn't necessarily have to be eye movement. And she had somebody that couldn't see come to her and say, hey, I'd like to try this. So she adapted that for the person. And she noticed that tapping works. Any of the bilateral stimulation works for people. So it can be the eye movement, it can be tapping, it can be listening to sounds in both sides, alternating. It can be holding on to paddles, and they have sensation back and forth. So it's this back and forth movement that, while you're processing traumatic thoughts, feelings, moves that into another part of your brain so you can utilize more of your reasoning with those feelings. So it's feelings to thoughts, basically. So this has just evolved more and more. So basically, the whole process of EMDR is an 8-phase process. Today, we're going to be focusing on phase 2, which is when we stabilize our clients. We resource build. We figure out what kind of resources that they have as far as coping skills. And then we start giving them some technical skills that they can utilize during, before, and after their EMDR processing. So today what we're going to try to do is give you guys some skills that you can use as an advocate. If you're a therapist, you can still utilize these skills. And it just really strengthens that connection between to make it pleasant, adaptive, and a neutral experience. So that's what the phase 2 like our activities are going to do. So and one thing that we really want you to realize too today is that the things that we're going to teach you, you can use for yourself, for your participants that come in, for your clients. But unless you're a mental health therapist or a therapist that has been trained in EMDR, you have to be trained in EMDR as a therapist to utilize the full experience. So we don't, you know, we're giving you some things that you can use. These are definitely tools that you can all use, but you can't practice EMDR until you've been fully trained. So we're just giving you some things that you actually can do. And historically speaking, even before Dr. Shapiro noticed what she was doing, we have to acknowledge that our ancestors and the indigenous people have had a lot of healing bilateral movements throughout their cultures, drumming, singing, dancing, all of these things that promote this bilateral movement, historically we've seen have been used in healing techniques. So we would definitely want to acknowledge that part of EMDR as the precursor for actually what's going on in our brains. And so it's historically been adaptive for healing. So that's what I have for the history of EMDR. And if anybody wants to chime in, Dina, Ava, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think you did. I think you did a really beautiful job.
Okay.
And I put a little bit of that in the chat as you went along, just kind of like backing up exactly what you were saying, that, this treatment does acknowledge the healing power of bilateral stimulation, that it's not something new. It's something that as we became more aware of what it was actually doing, right? Because we know more about the function of the brain now than we used to, we were able to kind of use it as a way of helping and actually being intentional, right? And a lot of that mindfulness is based in that mindfulness practice, right? Like when we know what we're doing and we're actually harnessing it to do it intentionally.
Mhm.
We did want to talk a little bit about, in the past, like I've gotten a lot of questions about EMDR, with some people thinking that it's pseudoscience, or that it's something that's brand new. And so, like Joan said, this actually does date back to the 80s, and which was a surprise to me. I didn't know quite how long it had been around, but its initial origins date back to work with PTSD of veterans. And then over time, when we started to realize PTSD wasn't, something that just veterans experience, that it was something that anybody with trauma history, so, people who were in war zones but weren't veterans, people who had really high ACEs. And so ACEs are always something that we focus on in our work a lot. So those are those adverse childhood experiences. And so the higher the childhood adverse experiences that we have, the more likely it is. And so for a time, what Shapiro used to do is she used to distinguish she used to say capital T trauma versus small t trauma, to kind of distinguish a person with PTSD and a person with other experiences that were distressing. And so that's not really used anymore in quite the same way, but I think it is helpful as framing for what we mean, because I do want to acknowledge that the word trauma gets used in all kinds of ways, and mental health language sometimes gets messy and gets I don't know how to say it without saying it, but people will say, "Oh my God, I had what a trauma," and they'll use the word they'll throw around the word, and it kind of diminishes the meaning of it. And so for mental health purposes, when we talk about trauma, that's kind of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about events that were distressing to the individual who experienced them, but there is a difference between trauma and PTSD. And so that's a diagnosis that comes with very specific things that you have to meet in order to be diagnosed with it. And are there lots of people who may be undiagnosed? Sure, absolutely, because access to mental health services is hit or miss in a lot of communities, and a lot of our folks don't like to go to therapy. And so I think it helps when we talk about adverse experiences, because it also removes some of the stigma around it, right? That a lot of people experience adverse childhood experiences. And so does EMDR work? And so what we wanted to share is that we know that many people come to the work as survivors as well. And I am not, I'm one of those people who's openly out about being a survivor in the movement, as part of not just having done advocacy work, having done my own healing work, but then also as a person who now works for the council, which is the certifying body for our sexual assault centers across the state. And so coming to the work as a survivor, I have personally used EMDR in healing and seen its benefits firsthand, even before I started using it as an actual coping strategy. I remember that one of the things that would really help me as an adolescent is when I was feeling overwhelmed, I would go for walks. I would just get up, go out and walk. And something about that movement, and I didn't know why it helped. Now I understand why. But even today, if I can go for, a long hike, a long walk, that does it. And then I learned as I got older, right, that there were other techniques that kind of mimic that same. For me, another one is drumming, like on a hand drum. I have a djembe. And so djembe drumming is one of the techniques that really helps. But anything, it can be dance, it can be, and you'll see Dina will show you a technique later, a really simple one, right? But even things like crochet, right? If you're a person who likes crafting or anything, like the idea of like you have to use both hands in conjunction with one another, all of those are things that help out. And so, and I know that Dina and Joan also have some like personal testimonies of seeing this work as they were being trained.
Yes, during training, we had the opportunity to be the client as well as the therapist. And it does its wonders. And it is sometimes, it can be training as well. But it is like what Eva said, a holistic way to um, help uh, with the unprocessed memories or with something that happened. And keeping in mind too that what Eva mentioned earlier was trauma can be anything. In other words, like somebody in a car accident, it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual assault. Since we're working in a dual center, right? It can be something that has negatively impacted the person, a memory or unprocessed information. So, but definitely it does its wonders. It has helped me with some negative beliefs, right, during the training. So I think that it's a great way, and there's some actual like research on it, and we're gonna talk about like the CT scan later on too, and where there's evidence that it is helping. So I, I don't know if you want to pull it up or if we're gonna show that later on, the CT scan of the actual brain of a patient who has been using post EMDR. There's like a difference.
Yeah, we can either do that or we can send it out like afterwards with the resources as well. There are a couple videos and stuff that we've included to send them later, like including some of the Siegel stuff that we're going to talk about. So, but yeah, I love that there is evidence-based research backing this technique. And if you are a fan of or have heard of The Body Keeps the Score. The Body Keeps the Score, it talks about EMDR as one of those emerging strategies for healing the brain. Joan, did you want to
Oh,
add your
yeah.
experience? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just jump in really quick. So, yeah, again, wondering about EMDR, whether or not it was really what everybody says it is. I was always curious. Um, and so, yeah, I jumped at the chance to be able to take this training because I'm just everything that I can utilize, all the, tools in the toolbox. The more you have, the better your outcomes can be for folks. So yeah, so we did the client therapist activities during our practicum, and I was in a really bad car wreck in 2003, and then most recently, my husband and I were on 75, and I had we were on 75 coming home, and a piece of plywood flew out of somebody's truck that they were hauling and literally landed on the hood of our car, skidded up. And, that watching that come at me again and not being able to have any control over that situation, much like what happened in 2003, where I was very injured, it was terrifying. So I used that as one of my traumas because it really had started me having panic attacks again while I was driving. So I utilized that. And the last time that I had to go driving out into the country, I was utilizing those positive thoughts, those positive cognitions that I used to replace the negative cognitions. Like I am in control, because I am in control when I'm driving my car, and the person that's driving their car is in control too. So just thinking about that back and forth really helped me stay focused, and my stress level while driving has been reduced a lot. all over that one little experience with EMDR. And it's amazing, like, how does that happen? How, you know, I kept saying that, like, in our training, like, how does this really happen? But it is the brain thing, and we're going to explain that to you guys in a little bit about how the brain works and where the information is in the brain and where we want it to go in the brain, so that we can better adapt um, our cognitions to positive. So yes, that was my experience, and it does work. I promise you, it does work. One other thing that too I want to kind of mention, because um, as advocates, as therapists that are working with um, these beautiful people that have experienced so many traumas, we hear this on a daily basis. We hear it over and over again. And their traumas are either, well, they're all, I want to say they're all fresh, because if they're coming to us, they're being bothered by what has just happened to them, either a while back or now they just haven't been able to process it. It's still in that part of their brain where it's keeping them activated emotionally. So we hear these things all the time. We need to also make sure that we're not having secondary trauma from their experiences, because it's a lot for us to hold. So I just want to encourage everybody that's an advocate, that's a therapist, please, you know, pay attention to how you're feeling, pay attention to your reactions to some of your clients, because it's a lot to hold. We have to hold that space for them, but what do we do? So, you know, this might be a great therapy for you to find another therapist to work with. In your agencies, you may have therapists that are trained in EMDR. Talk to them. Go see what you can do. But I'm hoping that what we're explaining to you today can give you a little bit of things to work with, you know, some tools. But yeah, please pay attention to that. And also, you know, your clients may have a lot of complex trauma. So that's a whole nother layer of trauma. So, you know, it's a lot. You're dealing with a lot, and you do a beautiful job. And oh, I just love that everybody is on board. And I thank you again for coming to the meeting today, because we're all very excited about this. I am. So there.
Yeah,
That was
we're right there with you. Yes. The other thing we want to say is, like, I think when I was a younger advocate, I always had the idea of like, oh, I'm just going to refer them, and they're going to start like EMDR therapy tomorrow, right? And one of the things that can get confusing for people is that they think that like the EMDR therapy is that thing, right? The bilateral stimulation, and they don't realize that they may not be ready for that part, because that part really is about triggering them. And so if they don't have the resources, and the resources don't just include these coping mechanisms that we're teaching them, right? Like, it's like, how effective are these actually for you? When you come back into session with me, what are you saying to me? So therapists are assessing for that constantly. They're assessing for where the person is. And so a client may not be ready for like that part of EMDR, those later phases, until a year, 2 years, 3 years. Some may never be ready for that. And so they may stay in phase 2 for quite a while, you know? And so we want to be clear about that, because just because they're in phase 2 for like 3 years doesn't mean they're not technically doing EMDR. They're doing EMDR. They're just not doing the reprocessing part of EMDR yet, you know? And it may be that the therapist is working on enhancing, building, extending their window of tolerance. If you have a client who has a very small window of tolerance, they're not going to be able to handle what you have to do to them, the ways that you have to trigger them during that active process of reprocessing. So we just kind of wanted to add that in. But okay, let's get into the meat of like the how does this work on the brain? And Joan's going to talk to you a little bit about Siegel's hand model of the brain, and like the 2 hemispheres, and what that looks like.
There we go. I don't know if does everybody have an infographic of that? Ava, was that sent out yet? Just so
No,
that
I'm going to upload it to I'll
Okay.
upload it to the chat, and then they
Okay.
can have it with them.
So basically what we're going to be dealing with in EMDR is 3 areas of the brain. And it's very simple for you to explain to somebody how this works, because it's a hand model. You may have been exposed to this before, maybe not. But we'll just take our hand, put your thumb here, do this. I want to turn it sideways. And so we're going to look at this as the person's brainstem. The brainstem is where all the reptilian, kind of like our very basic functions that keep us alive, come from. Your breathing, digestion, everything we don't have to think about doing comes from this part of our brain. And this is where the freeze response originates, or did originate until it kind of moved up into here, hypothalamus. This is where the amygdala is. This is our emotional center of the brain. This is where the fight, flight, freeze, fawn area is activated. And unfortunately for people with trauma, and when they experience trauma, this is where their trauma goes, right here. This is the emotions, this is the feelings, this is everything they experience in their senses, right here. And this stays active all the time. This is all of our feelings, because we can't turn our feelings off and our emotions off. So we're always having this. But those traumatic responses, those traumatic feelings are here. This prefrontal cortex, the neocortex. This is where all of our reasoning is, our executive functions, our decision making, our thoughts, our rational thoughts, saying that's not really the way it happened. That's, everything that we plan, that we do, all of the, when we make decisions up here. So EMDR basically wants to get your feelings, your emotions, where the trauma is trapped, right here to here. And how does that happen? Well, if you put your hands like this is a brain. Now, on the top of our brain, this goes here, is the corpus callosum. That's how this gets to here. It's a bridge. And EMDR basically widens that bridge as we're doing the bilateral stimulation. Bilateral, getting from here to here. And it strengthens that connection. So what we're trying to do through a person's thought process, and again, they don't have to tell us exactly what they're thinking about. They have an opportunity to do, but they don't have to. They don't have to explain that. What they're thinking will go from here to here. So when they think about it after it's been moved, it doesn't seem so it doesn't seem so heightened, because they're not thinking out of their emotional brain, they're thinking out of their rational brain. So the way that they can make that connection, that's a lot of free association, but it's whatever comes up while they're going through that process. And this is phases 3 through 7 that we're not going to get into today. But if you've ever done EMDR, you know what I'm talking about. If you want to learn more about it, get the EMDR book. But again, this processing, and when we do this to move these thoughts into our rational brain, it has to be done by a licensed therapist, somebody that's been trained in EMDR, because we are really activating an emotional response from our clients. So with that said, some of our clients can dissociate very easily because of their trauma. They've learned how to do that. It's a maladaptive behavior, but it has served them properly so that they can function in their life with all of this going on. So that's basically exactly how the brain works in EMDR. This is the emotional center. This is the rational center, and we move the emotional thoughts that are maladaptive into the neocortex, which is adaptive, so they can manage that trauma better. If you have any questions about that, go ahead, stick it in the chart. We're going to be sending you some pictures. We've got the big brain picture here. I think that we have that, something like that. You can basically, if you want to print these off and have your clients color them when you're kind of explaining how that works before you send them off to a therapist, that would be great. So, again, it's the way that brain processes and how the information gets stored. They use it adaptively, but it's very maladaptive. That's why they continue to have their trauma and react to that trauma, because it is all emotional based in their brain. And we do the best we can to try to get some relief for them, to move it on out. So if you have any questions, we've got some more, information about that. But as far as EMDR and research, with the brain, again, as Dina was talking earlier about that, there is evidence, based on imaging, MRI imaging, EEGs. In 2014, they were able to capture an EEG where it actually showed somebody, the brain lighting up doing EMDR, how it was moving from the one center of the brain, the emotional brain, to the rational brain. And that was like the first findings of its kind for the for EMDR, to give that like validity on the brain level. So it's really good. It's really good stuff. And that's what I have about the brain.
Thank you. And for those of you who, I don't know who's on their phone and who's, but I have put in the chat that sheet that that Joan kind of held up to the screen. The brain model sheet is from the Institute for Creative Mindfulness, which was the center that we use for our training. And so that form is up there on the chat for you. It's available online. And then that CT scan that's been referenced is also up on there, just the brain showing overactivity. And so overactivity is basically the brain in a triggered state, whether that trigger is a smell or a behavior or just feeling out of control, whatever is triggering your survivor, your client. And then that same brain after EMDR treatment. So you can kind of see how it reduces really rapidly that, maybe not rapidly, I shouldn't say that. It depends on each client, right? But how the EMDR treatment does reduce that reactivity. And so I want to talk about the polyvagal system as well. This is the other part of EMDR. And so first I should mention as a disclaimer that not all neuroscientists are fans of the polyvagal theory, but it is strongly supported by other people in the community, including Dr. Bessel van der Kolk in The Body Keeps the Score, which is that book that we mentioned a little bit earlier. And really for an illustration of the body-mind concept, which becomes really important with our survivors, because we know that our survivors may not always have clear memories because of how trauma happens and how traumatic memories are stored in the brain and they're disorganized, right? We always use that file cabinet analogy where normal memory, because we're not in a triggered state and we're not afraid. And so that amygdala, right? And so we talk about, if you watch the Siegel video afterwards, he'll talk about how being afraid or being triggered is like flipping your lid. So all of a sudden, that whole prefrontal cortex that allows you to think logically, that allows you to communicate what you're trying to communicate, goes offline. So you're just reacting. You're not really there. And so when people are reacting, they're not in a state where they can really learn, where they can really have a peaceful conversation with you, where they can even think through that. And so that mind-body connection is really important to keep in mind. And so in a nutshell, the polyvagal system, which was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, looks at how humans, like how we as human mammals, basically human mammals, evolved in terms of the functioning of our nervous systems. So this theory is centered on the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is something that runs almost all the way through our system, from our brain all the way down to our stomach, and so to our digestive system. And so it covers not just our brain, but almost every major organ in our body. And so if you've ever felt heartbreak, for example, and all of a sudden, like you have a very strong emotional reaction and it just feels like you have a tightness in your chest. Or if all of a sudden you just heard really bad news and it feels like your stomach just dropped. All of that is the vagus nerve basically being activated. And so one interesting way of thinking about this that I've heard and that really helped me was that we used to think of humans only having like our brain, right? Like our head brain. And now people are starting to elaborate on that and think about, well, if the nervous system is all connected, we don't have just one brain. We have our head brain, we have our heart brain, we have our stomach brain. And so that we think really and interact in terms of how those systems work with all three of those and then others as well, right? Our respiratory system, which is why breath becomes so important in the work that we do. And so that's also why symptoms of trauma are often associated with dysfunction in breathing, with dysfunction in terms of eating disorders or stomach issues. So the oldest part of that system, of our vagal system, is the dorsal vagal system, which is associated with that freeze reaction or immobilization or shutdown responses. And so not just freeze, but freeze and fawn. So fawn is a relatively newer concept. It's the concept that sometimes we will just act to appease the person when we are in a triggered state. And so even though we may not have wanted to, if our frontal cortex function is offline because we've now flipped our lid, we may just be like, whatever you want, or say yes, 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 even though we didn't mean to say yes. And that just comes from being taught to just appease the person so that you won't get hurt in that process. And so these are linked to trauma and extreme stress. And so what we talk about when we talk about freeze, we're talking about being in a hypoarousal state where we don't think that fighting is going to help us survive. And so instead of fighting, we just kind of fawn or freeze up and let whatever's going to happen so that we can live to tell this tale, basically. And so we see this in animals often, right? We see like the deer in the headlights. That's that reaction. The sympathetic system is the next most formed and activates what we know as our flight or fight system. And so that's kind of the opposite. That's on the other end. It's the hyperarousal system. And the last is our ventral vagal system. And so that's our parasympathetic nervous system. And it's the youngest. It's the part that kind of promotes social engagement, connection. It's where we're the most receptive to change and also to healing are internally. So in EMDR, our goal is first to identify what the survivor or client's window of tolerance is. And so we talked a little bit about that earlier in the call. And so these are the boundaries within which we can stay in that non-threatened, unafraid state of mind. And so if we exit that, then we see that the client either can disassociate, and disassociation is one of those freezing type, like hypoarousal states. And if they get kind of really negative and really like you'll see that they're starting to move a lot, or they're getting angry, or their voice is, the tone of their voice gets raised. That's the opposite. That's hyperarousal. And it's usually not aimed at the therapist or at the survivor, the survivor's advocate, right? It's just that person's being triggered. They're in a triggered state, and they often come to us in this way. People with higher ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences that we mentioned a little bit earlier, may have smaller windows of tolerance. And so that's really important for us to always keep in mind as we're doing this work with people. And so preparing that client for EMDR really often requires that therapist to increase that window of tolerance, to know how many adverse childhood experiences that person has. And so tools like those inventories that assess for that may be a part of phase one, where we're doing intakes with clients. And so even the intake process can be a longer process when you're looking at a survivor's and clients' history, so that you can really understand where they're coming from and where their system is activated and not activated. And so the window of tolerance, you know, can impact how destabilized the person becomes. And another thing that we look at is what their support networks look like. And so we know that with a lot of our clients, especially if we're working with housing issues, we tend to have clients who maybe don't have that, right? Who are sort of on their own, don't have a lot of family that they can, and this is by design, right? People who are abusive or tend to isolate our victims and get them to a place where they don't have anywhere else to go. And so these clients often will take longer to be able to work with or to expand that window of tolerance for them. And sometimes we're going to have to address all those other issues that they have. And so this is where advocacy becomes really, really important for us as therapists, right? Because we want to be working in conjunction with what you're already doing, with what you're addressing. And so we want to heal the mind, but healing the mind also requires that that person be stable. And sometimes being stable means that we need to look at some of those other needs, you know, and often, you know, the funding may not always account for what the healing process requires and what that stabilization requires. But this is how we foster resilience, correct? Like this is, you know, leading into today, I just kind of want to emphasize that that expanding the window of tolerance doesn't just include the therapeutic pieces that we're working on. It includes a lot of these very basic core elements of, do you have enough food? You know, are you housed? You know, are your kids taken care of if you have kids? Do you feel any kind of connection to anybody? Do you have a network of support? And when they don't, we are, you know, right? We are that network of support for them. And so I want to let Dina also pop in here and talk to you a little bit about two of the things that happen with EMDR in terms of that bilateral stimulation, or we often will talk about tapping, although it doesn't have to be tapping, whatever the form of bilateral stimulation is, that has to do with how slow or fast it goes.
Thank you, Eva, for that.
Yes.
So to begin with, the tapping is basically the bilateral stimulation, and where you use both left and right hemisphere of the brain. And the purpose for the bilateral stimulation, also known as the BLS, it helps alleviate distressing emotional, psychological symptoms. And in the slow tapping, this is where it helps reduce and slow down anxiety in thinking as well as breathing. So it helps be more relaxed, in other words. And the fast bilateral is more of um, processing any unresolved memory or negative belief that the client uh, discloses or is working on. Um, like Eva mentioned, the bilateral stimulation doesn't have to be tapping. There's a lot of different ways to do the BLS. It can be tapping on the thighs if you're sitting down, right? It can also be the butterfly, right? Where kind of like you hug yourself and you're using both hands to tap in a slow set. In other words, but you can also use, I think I have a small ball here, a ball as well. So this is also BLS, right? It can even be walking, hiking, anything, whatever the client feels comfortable in using it as BLS, right? So that's something that I wanted to bring up too as well. Um, Pretty much the difference from the slow versus fast, as I mentioned, is slow as, within the services that we offer, we would want to help the client be more relaxed, right? And whatever tapping or BLS you would want to utilize, that can be the method to use in order to help the client be more um, stable. In other words, and then the fast we wouldn't encourage that, because that is when you're actually activating that processing, and that would make the client slash survivor be more not relaxed. So we want to avoid that. So I just want to emphasize that. And I don't know if the ladies, Eva or Joan, if I left out anything, please feel free to chime in. But that is what I wanted to emphasize.
No, you did a beautiful job. And I just want to take a pause before we kind of jump into the actual exercises that we're going to demonstrate for you today, and ask if there are any questions so far. Anything about what EMDR is, who it works for, what the tapping does, or anything that we've spoken about. Please do feel free to chime in the chat.
And I do want to mention something. EMDR is great fit for those who are experiencing anxiety, right? Who's a good candidate? Those who have phobias, depression, trauma. So that's something to, know if you do come upon a survivor, because like what Joan mentioned, usually the population that we work or serve tend to have complex trauma as well. So something to keep in mind when you make that referral.
Yeah, and the one thing that they do mention is you want to stay within your own populations, right? So if you've always worked within the realm of trauma with sexual violence, sexual violence is your sort of like what you know the most about, your expertise. You may not want to necessarily address drug addiction with EMDR unless drug addiction is your expertise. You might want to find another therapist whose expertise is in drug addiction and who's using EMDR, because there are special protocols for other populations, and this can be used with a number of different populations, including folks with autism or other mental health issues as well. So we're gonna do 3 different techniques for you. Hopefully, if we can get through all of them. We are at 11:32. And so we're going to start with the complex, and Joan is going to use slow tapping just to illustrate that for you. And then we'll probably jump into light stream with music with Dina.
Okay, so now is your time to be able to participate with us. And I want to take you through a visualization. It's guided imagery. This is one of the techniques that we teach all of our EMDR clients, because it's one of the things that they may need to utilize as a coping skill if they become overly activated during a session. We may have to have them stop and activate their calm space. We might want to put them into their calm space. So we want to give them a place where they can mentally go to relax. The purpose of this exercise is for you to sense into a place that you've been or that you can imagine going. Choose a place or space where bringing it up and engaging it will likely elicit a pleasant, happy, or safe enough experience. Try to keep other people out of the visualization. So we don't want you to imagine you're in a calm space with your family, because one of those family members may have something to do with one of your triggers, or just anybody. We want you to just be alone with your visualization, and it's just about you and this place. So what we're going to do right now is go through it. A couple of things that I want to tell you beforehand. that if in your own life, if you're prone to dissociation, you don't have to participate in this, because sometimes, even though we're doing a pleasant experience and going into a pleasant place, that experience of disassociation can happen. If you still want to do it, we encourage you to keep your eyes open. If you may decide that, you know, it's something that may be a little bit of a trigger for you, you can do this exercise with your eyes open. And that helps people avert dissociating sometimes. And or you can, for grounding purposes, if you have something in your office by your desk that can keep you grounded, if you have a koosh ball, or if you have something, a hairbrush or an object that you can hold in your hand to keep you grounded, that's another thing that you may want to do if you feel like you could have an experience of dissociation. But again, this is supposed to be a calming exercise that's going to help you just feel like safe. And we can use these for our own purposes between clients sometimes, so you can just visualize where you want to be. So I'm going to have you sit with me right now. Get comfortable in your chair or wherever you are. You can sit on the floor. You can sit wherever it makes you feel the most comfortable. And so I want you to allow this calm place that you choose to come into focus. Let's scan your senses and allow each sense to experience this place. What are you seeing? How would you describe the colors? What are the sounds, if any, in your place? Are there any smells or tastes? If so, notice those. Where are your hands and feet? Notice any sensations that you're experiencing. So now I'm going to ask you to cross your arms, and we're going to do some slow tapping. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Take a moment to notice the details. What is most noticeable to you? Take a moment to absorb that detail or those details. Take a breath. What are you noticing now? Let's tap. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Notice what you're doing in this place of yours. Whether you're in stillness or in motion, pay attention to that. Take a breath. What are you noticing now? I'm going to tap. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Notice what your body is experiencing in this place. If you wish, give your place and your experiencing in your experience a word or phrase. The word or phrase will be your cue to access the place whenever you might need it. Let's do some tapping. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now hold that for a moment. When you're ready, you can open your eyes if you've closed them. You can come back. And I hope that that has helped you relax a little bit. Even doing that exercise for me kind of made me feel calm. Now, typically, we would have already taught the slow tapping to our clients. So I wouldn't normally be saying 1, 2. But because of our time frame here and what we've taught you, today, I wanted to make sure that you were tapping properly, slowly, because that's a calming tap in. And while we would be doing this with a client, I would also elicit some feedback. You can ask them what they're experiencing. See if it's adaptive. See if, they're okay and they feel safe in this space. Sometimes people, depending upon their trauma level, may not be able to go to a safe place because they may not feel that anywhere is safe. They may be just so stuck in that middle brain right now that they are constantly in hyperarousal. So, that's something that we need to be aware of. If they say that they can't really connect, that's okay. We'll try something else. But this technique usually really works for folks. It helps reinforce adaptive thoughts, that safe, calm feeling. In the slow tapping reinforces calmness. Again, like Dina was saying, the very, very quick, when we do the quick processing, that engages the brain. We don't want to do that unless we're actually moving through phase 3 through 7. But this is fine to do. And some people, depending upon their experience, even slow tapping may not be something that they can tolerate. Again, that's what you need to kind of assess for. Even doing a calm space. So you may want to leave out the tapping altogether and just do some other guided visualization to help them mitigate their stress. So I hope you like that. And that is our calm, safe space.
Thank you, Joan, for that.
Very
That really helped out, and I'm hoping that most of everyone is relaxed. So we're gonna do another guided visualization, and with this one we will include music. So I would like to invite everyone to please be as comfortable as you can. If you want to stand up, feel free. If you still want to remain seated, feel free as well. And you are more than welcome to have your eyes opened or closed. That is all up to you. So I'm just going to give you a few minutes so that everybody can get situated and be as comfortable as possible. Okay. So this is another soothing, self-soothing activity, as I mentioned. So we'll go ahead and begin. So this is called the light stream. Imagine a bright and healing light that is forming overhead on top of your head. This light can be whatever you want, whatever color you want, whatever you want to associate this light with healing, happiness, goodness, any other positive quality. If you don't like the idea of a light, you can think of simply as a color or essence. Take a breath. Just notice that light. Now think about this light beginning to move through your body or over your body like a shield or force field of your choice from the top of your head, moving inch by inch, slowly until it reaches the bottom of your feet. Take a breath and notice what you're noticing. Focus on that light.
I have everything I need. I have everything I need. I have everything I need. From the mountain
In
to
a
the
few
sea,
moments,
I have
just noticing that
everything I
presence
need.
of this light
I have
or essence.
everything I need.
Notice if you want
I
this light
have
to have
everything
any
I
other
need.
quality
I have
besides
everything I
color.
need. I have
Think about the
everything I
texture or
need.
sound, even
From the
temperature
mountain to the
and
sea,
smell.
all of this is within me. I have everything I
Take a
need.
breath
I have everything
and
I
notice that,
need. I have
what your body's
everything I
feeling.
need. I have everything I need.
Feel free to move around.
From the mountain to the sea,
Feel free to move your
I have
arms.
everything I need. I have everything I need.
Allow your body to move around as well.
I have everything I need. I
Allow
have
that light
everything I
or
need.
essence
I have everything I need.
move around your
From
body.
the mountain to the sea, all of this is within me. I have everything I need.
Take a moment and notice that light. Take a breath. Take a moment.
The fruitful darkness
Now you can draw your attention back
is all
whenever you're ready.
around us. The fruitful darkness is all around us.
Just take a moment if you need to. And whenever you're ready, you can come back. I really hope that this guided visualization technique has helped you. And again, you can also implement the tapping with this as well, or with even music to help the client or yourself be more grounded, just focusing on the present. I do apologize if the sound was too high, but I can share this soundtrack to you all if you like as well.
Thank you, Dina. That was receiving the music is always such a beautiful gift. One of the things that our mentor in this work taught us too is that it's music and song in general is one of the four healing balms or salves of of like indigenous practice. And so just kind of sitting in gratitude for that practice. And like with these other practices, if you use other things like art or music, if you know what speaks to your survivor, your client, you can incorporate those modalities in there, make them culturally specific for them. And so the last practice that we offer you today is called the container. And so the container is a useful tool to establish with that survivor, that client, as a way to safety plan in reality for the distress that may come up between sessions and even during a session. Sometimes you're working on one memory and another memory pops in, and that one needs to be quickly and safely stored for another day, for another as a memory that you might process next, or in another processing session. And then also with survivors who are working through other systems, for example, they might need, if they're facing a lot of triggers very quickly, like if they're dealing with the legal system, if they're dealing with law enforcement, if they're dealing with families, and we know a lot of our clients don't report, so it may not be a legal system, but it may be their land person, right? The owner of the place that they rent. And so being able to store some of these distressing moments away for a time that they can come back into therapy or with their advocate to process it is really helpful. Containers are nice because they come in all shapes and sizes. They can hold things for us that we're not quite ready to metabolize, to address. And as a side note, it's not a way to stuff away or repress, right? Those things, because that's the opposite of what we want to do. We want to help people heal. We want to help people be able to stay present with these distressing things and to actually cope with them in their everyday life. And that's what therapy is for. And so it's a way to help them manage that negativity until they're ready to deal with it, to address it. So if you will, I'm going to invite you to bring up some kind of secure container to your mind's eye in this moment, in this place, in this digital space that we're co-creating. This container should be strong enough to hold all the necessary disturbing stuff that can get triggered during your process of healing, during your everyday normal interactions, be they at home, be they at work, be they on your commute, anything. It should be strong enough to hold memories that are disturbing to you, images, thoughts, physical sensations, sounds, smells, and emotions, any accompanying emotions that those bring up for you that feel like too much right now. If you will, if you can think of some kind of container that speaks to you, and you can feel free to pop it into the chat right now. Perhaps it's a book bag, a safe, a purse, a picture box, a mason jar, a trunk. Again, these containers can come in many shapes, many sizes. Take a breath. Exhale. And really exhale audibly so you can hear yourself sigh. Let's do that one more time. What would this container have to be like in order to securely hold your distress. Pick a visual representation of a container that works for you. It can be something that carries great meaning for you, or something that's just more neutral. What are you coming up with? Again, I invite you to share it in the chat if you feel called to. And if you want to keep it to yourself, that's okay too. Okay. But now that you have that container in mind, and you can close your eyes. It does help with the visualization practice when you close your eyes so that your eyes aren't getting input from the rest of the world. I want you to picture yourself opening that container. Picture yourself sending in or placing whatever you may need to inside that container. Again, just any distressing thoughts, sounds, any physical sensations as you scan your body from head to toe, remembering that light, that gift of light that Dina gave you. Any physical sensations, any smells, any emotions, and any thoughts. It's okay if they come, just notice them without judgment in this moment. Is there anything else in this moment that needs to go in there, in that box, in that container? If there is, place it in there as well. And take another breath in and out. And just notice. What are you noticing now? If you feel that there's anything else left, anything that just kind of is pulling at you at the corner of your mind, put that into the container as well. And if you're feeling done, if you're feeling like that was it, that's all I had, then let's start thinking about how we close. If it doesn't feel like you're done or that container still needs something, ask yourself, what does it need to be more secure, to feel like it can truly hold everything I needed to in this moment? And remember that you can come back to this container, you can adapt it, you can grow it, you can change it at any time. Sometimes we need bigger containers. Sometimes we place that container inside another container. Some people simply add locks. Just choose something that feels good for you, that feels adaptive, positive. Once you're ready, once this container feels like it's strong enough, secure enough, we're going to shut it. Shut that container. Take a note of any sensations that come just with closing that container. And take another breath. What are you noticing now? Do you feel relief? Is there any difference? Remember, you can open and place things in this container at any time. This is your container. Last, you're going to give your container a name, or at least associate it with a phrase. Something that means something for you and something that you'll remember. Some people choose words like revolt. You can use this to remind yourself of the container when you're feeling distressed. Remember, oh, I need that container. There it goes, into the vault, into the box, into the jar, into whatever you've created for yourself. And if you have a name and you want to share it, you want to evoke it into the space, I invite you to do that into the chat. You can also private message it to us if you're feeling vulnerable. Okay. Relieved. Somebody shared that they feel relieved. Repeat that name of your container to yourself, either aloud or in your mind. And I want you to take one last breath and just notice. Oh. Slowly, I invite you back into the space, back into your day. And I want to remind you that that container is for you. You can use it at work. You can use it after you've processed a particularly difficult case or had an interaction that didn't go the way that you expected or hoped, or when you bring something with your day that you don't want to let impact your day. That container is there. It's for you. And we've come to the end of our time together, but with that, we do want to take some time to, again, invite you to ask any questions you may have, and also just to give us some feedback on the process, what that process was like for you going through those exercises. I will say that usually there are about 2 or 3 that are created at one time in a session. I've done personally, I think 2 has been the limit of like how many we'll create in one day. And that generally when you are creating these with your therapist and for EMDR, you are using that slow bilateral stimulation along with it to really kind of cement it in there for yourself as you're doing it, and so that it feels like something that's safe for you. So this is something that if you want to redo, you could add that slow bilateral tapping or marching in place or walking as you do it. So for now, just kind of invite. Okay. Folks are saying it felt warm and good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad this was helpful. One of my favorite containers in the past, very soothing. Thank you, Cassandra. One of the containers that I really enjoyed was for those Little Mermaid lovers out there. Little Mermaid was my favorite growing up. I always loved like thinking about like everything that I had stored in me as like this ugly black cloud of like gunk. And I just kind of sang it into like a shell, and the shell just kind of like took everything. So in this case, the shell's not an evil thing stealing my voice. It's just the shell holding all of that gunk for me. And, knowing that there are plenty of shells. And so if I ever needed to kind of get it back, I could crush that shell, let it out, bring it back in, address it, and I could always store it in another shell, right? Kind of like a little hermit crab. So again, those containers come in all shapes and sizes. And so please know that you have us at your disposal if you need to reach out to us. If something comes up for you after the training, if you're like, okay, yeah, this brought something up for me and I didn't expect it and I didn't know, I'm here. So you can reach out to me, and I'm going to put my information in the chat. And Dina and Joan are going to do the same. So if you have questions for any of us, we're here to answer those for you. And earlier we did put some worksheets into the chat. And so if you missed, those went in there along with some of the images that we were talking about, the brain images, the CT scan images. But those worksheets that we added explaining neurobiology and plasticity are very helpful with clients if you're trying to kind of explain to them how this all works in the brain. And in the future, we do want to let you know too that we do have a YouTube channel for the Florida Council Against Violence, where we do have a couple of EMDR techniques that we didn't cover today. And so one of my personal favorites is butterfly hug. And we kind of alluded to that one earlier because sometimes in the process of butterfly hugging, we do that bilateral stimulation. So we might teach the bilateral stimulation through like a butterfly hug like. And, you know, really you need to know your clients when you do this, just to know, is this going to feel restrictive? Is it going to trigger something for them about how they were held during maybe their assault? And so we always give multiple options, you know, and we do this not just because of trauma, but also because some folks may have accessibility issues around some of these techniques. And so it might be easier for them to, instead of doing this, to do a smaller butterfly on their chest, or to just squeeze their hands back and forth, or like Dina showed you with the ball, just kind of bouncing a ball back and forth. And so in the follow-up resources that we'll send, you'll have a couple of those videos, including mindful breathing with Irene, tense and release, and practicing awareness. Those are originally in Spanish, but have subtitles in English. And then there are others that have been created by Dr. Jamie Marich, who leads a lot of these trainings as well. And so we have a complex telehealth demo that we'll send you out with that is hers, as well as the light and color stream exercise that Dina did today. And so this one's a little bit different. The one that Dina did incorporated music, and this one doesn't. And we'll also send you a video by Dr. Dan Siegel of him demonstrated his hand model of the brain. You can share this. If you don't feel confident enough yet, like kind of explaining it yourself, you can play the video for clients. And also a little bit more about the polyvagal theory explained simply in simple terms, and that window of tolerance as well. And so it was really just a pleasure to share space with all of you today. And we look forward to seeing you at future rural advocate calls, trainings, meetings. Thank you just for sharing your day with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again, everybody. I appreciate your time and space today, and hope that you leave a little bit more relaxed than you came in. I know I am.